The temperature just dropped below 80 degrees Fahrenheit, one of the coldest places on Earth. The ground is frozen solid. The cold wind makes it hard to breathe, and your main job is to catch seals so you don't freeze or starve. That's life for the Inuit people, and they've mastered it for thousands of years. But how do they catch seals without fancy modern technology? The answer: incredible skill, patience, and some very cool and deadly traditional weapons. Let's dive into the art of seal hunting, the Inuit way. Before going into detail about the hunting process, let's first talk about why seals are such a huge deal for the Inuit people. And I mean that literally, since an adult seal can weigh up to 300 pounds. For the Inuit, these blubbery creatures are basically their version of a Swiss Army knife. Except instead of tiny scissors and a bottle opener, you get enough food to feed a family for weeks. First up, there's the obvious reason: food. Seal meat is packed with protein and fat, which is exactly what you need when it's cold enough outside to freeze your words mid-sentence. The Inuit have some pretty clever ways to preserve this meat too. They'll often store it in underground chambers carved into the permafrost, nature's freezer, if you will. Some communities even ferment the meat in a traditional dish called igunak, though I'll warn you, it's definitely an acquired taste. But seals aren't just about filling bellies. Their skins are transformed into some seriously impressive waterproof clothing. The women in Inuit communities are masters at preparing these skins, scraping them clean and carefully stretching them until they're as flexible as modern Gore-Tex. They create parkas, called amauti, boots or kamik, and even waterproof pants. And yes, they had waterproof clothing figured out long before everyone else had. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Inuit use every single part of the seal, making modern recycling efforts look kind of amateur. The bones and teeth become tools and needles sharp enough to pierce thick hides. Seal fat gets rendered into oil that burns clean and bright in their traditional kulik lamps, providing both light and heat during those long Arctic nights. Even the intestines don't go to waste. When cleaned and dried, they become waterproof windows for their summer homes. Talk about thinking outside the box. The blubber is particularly valuable. It's like the duct tape of the Arctic, used for everything from insulation to fuel. Recent studies have shown that traditional seal oil lamps can maintain a temperature of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, inside an igloo, even when it's -40 outside. Without these resources from seals, surviving in the Arctic would be nearly impossible. But getting in range to these sharp-eyed creatures takes some serious skill. You might think sneaking up on a seal would be easy. After all, they're basically giant sausages with flippers. But these blubbery geniuses have super-powered senses that would make Superman jealous. Their hearing is so good, they can detect the smallest sounds from 100 feet away. The real action happens at the seal's breathing holes. These are like tiny pit stops that seals create in the ice to catch their breath while hunting. Finding these holes is step one of the Inuit seal hunting master plan. But here's the kicker. These breathing holes are usually only about the size of a dinner plate. Once an Inuit hunter spots a breathing hole, they've got to play the waiting game. And when I say waiting, I mean waiting. Research shows that successful hunters often sit motionless for up to 6 hours, without having a phone to check even once. The trick is to stay downwind because seals have noses that would put a bloodhound to shame. They can smell a human from crazy distances, which is why positioning is everything. The coolest part? Many hunters wear traditional seal skin clothing while hunting. It's not just about staying warm. The seal skin actually helps mask their human scent. Plus, when you're crawling across the ice, wearing seal skin helps you blend in. It's like the world's first ghillie suit, except it also keeps you from freezing to death. But the real MVP move in seal hunting is something called seal scratching. When a seal is nearby, some hunters will gently scratch the snow with a special tool, mimicking the sound of another seal. It's like sending a text message to a seal, except instead of "you up," it's more like, "Hey, the fishing's good over here." The seals actually respond to this, sometimes swimming right up to the breathing hole to check out their new friend. Getting close enough to strike takes a lot of patience and waiting. But once you're in position, you better be ready with your hunting tools, because seals don't exactly hang around for a photo op. Speaking of tools, the Inuit have developed some pretty incredible weapons for this exact purpose. See, Forget everything you've seen in action movies. The real hardcore weapons are the ones Inuit hunters have been using for generations. While modern hunters might show off their fancy rifles, traditional Inuit weapons are the real craftsmanship. The star of the show is definitely the harpoon, but we're not talking about some simple stick with a pointy end. Traditional Inuit harpoons are engineering masterpieces that would make NASA scientists scratch their heads. The tips are designed to do something pretty clever. They actually pivot sideways after hitting the seal, turning into a kind of underwater anchor. That way, even if your seal decides to play submarine and dive deep, they're not getting away. The coolest part. Many of these harpoons come with floats made from inflated seal skin, which bob up to show where your dinner went. Then there's the atlatl, which sounds like something you'd order at a fancy restaurant, but is actually a spear-throwing device that increases your strength. Studies have shown it can increase throwing speed by about 93%. That's the difference between throwing like a toddler and throwing like a pro baseball pitcher. The bow and arrow setup deserves some credit too. Unlike the lightweight arrows you might see at summer camp, Inuit arrows are built like tiny missiles. They've got heavy bone or ivory tips that can punch through thick blubber like it's butter. Some hunters even attached small bladders to their arrows. When they hit a seal, these bladders would fill with water and slow the seal down. It's like nature's version of those security tags that explode with ink when shoplifters try to steal clothes. Last but definitely not least is the sealskin snare, probably the most ninja-like tool in the Arctic hunting arsenal. It's basically a loop of rope made from sealskin that gets placed around breathing holes. When a seal pops up for air, the snare tightens faster than your jeans after Thanksgiving dinner. The genius part is that the more the seal struggles, the tighter the snare gets. But having these amazing tools is one thing. Knowing exactly when to use them is what separates the pros from the amateurs. And timing, well, that's where things get really interesting. Inuit hunters often camp out by breathing holes longer than most people can binge-watch their favorite TV show. We're talking about serious dedication here. Studies of traditional hunting practices show that successful hunters sometimes wait up to 8 hours in temperatures that would freeze your smartphone solid. Here's where it gets wild. Seals typically surface for just 2-3 seconds to breathe. The hunter has to stay completely still during this whole waiting game, because one wrong move, and that seal is gone. The really crazy part: experienced hunters can actually tell when a seal is about to surface just by the tiny bubbles that come up through the breathing hole. When that seal finally pops up its head, everything happens fast. The hunter has to strike in a split second, but with perfect accuracy. The traditional Inuit hunters have a success rate of around 60%, which is pretty impressive considering they're trying to hit a moving target that's only visible for a couple of seconds. But here's something that would surprise most people. The actual strike isn't even the hardest part. Once you've hit the seal, you've got to get it out of the water before it slips away. This is where those fancy harpoon designs really shine. The hunter has to play a careful game of tug-of-war with an animal that can weigh as much as a small piano. One wrong move, and your dinner, plus your precious hunting tool, disappears into the icy depths. The whole process is like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster in the dark while wearing mittens. It requires such precise timing that many Inuit hunters start learning these skills when they're kids. They practice the movements over and over until they become second nature. Kind of like how some people can text without looking at their phone. After all this drama, you'd think the hard part would be over. But actually, getting the seal back to camp isn't an easy task either. Hauling a 300-pound seal across the ice is just the beginning of what might be the world's most extreme recycling program. The Inuit are masters when it comes to saving anything they can. The first challenge is getting this massive catch back to camp. Traditional hunters use a special technique called seal dragging, where they create a small ice sled using nothing but water and snow. They pour water over the ice path, let it freeze, and suddenly they've got nature's slip and slide. Pretty clever, right? Some hunters can move a full-size seal several miles this way. Once back at camp, the real transformation begins. The butchering process is like a perfectly choreographed dance that's been passed down through generations. Special knives called ulus, shaped like half moons, make quick work of the thick skin and blubber. Fun fact: studies show these traditional ulu knives are actually more efficient for seal butchering than modern knives, with experienced users working about 30% faster. The meat gets divided up based on traditional customs. Some parts, like the liver, are considered delicacies and might be eaten right there on the spot. Talk about fresh food. Other pieces are preserved through various methods. Ever heard of niku? It's kind of like seal jerky, dried in the Arctic wind until it's perfect for snacking. They'll often store chunks of meat in seal oil, which acts as a natural preservative and keeps the meat good for months. The skin requires special attention. It's basically the Arctic's version of Gore-Tex. Women in the community carefully scrape the blubber from the hide using techniques that would make a surgeon jealous. Then comes the stretching and drying process, which can take several days. The end result is waterproof material that's more durable than anything you'll find at your local outdoor store. Even the smallest parts find a purpose. The intestines become windows. Yeah, you heard that right. When cleaned and dried, they're naturally translucent. Bones transform into tools, sinews become thread, and the bladder might become a water container. Before I get a lot of angry comments, I know that times have changed since the days when everyone hunted with bone harpoons, and modern Inuit seal hunting has evolved fast. These days, you might spot a hunter heading out with a rifle instead of a traditional weapon. Though don't be fooled, the old school knowledge is still just as important. It's like adding power steering to a car. The engine's different, but you still need to know how to drive. Currently, 70% of Inuit hunters use a mix of traditional and modern methods. They might zoom out to hunting spots on snowmobiles, but they're still using centuries-old tracking techniques to find those seals. Many hunters carry GPS devices nowadays, though honestly, most of them can still navigate by reading snow patterns and wind directions better than any satellite. The economics of seal hunting has shifted too. While it's still crucial for putting food on the table, with the average Inuit family consuming about 900 pounds of wild harvested meat per year, it's also become a source of income. Traditional sealskin clothing and crafts are now sold worldwide, supporting local communities and keeping ancient skills alive. A single, well-made sealskin parka can fetch upwards of $1,000 in southern markets. But here's where things get really interesting. These modern Inuit hunters are basically environmental scientists in disguise. They track seal populations, monitor ice conditions, and note climate changes with the precision of a weather station. Their knowledge is so valuable that environmental researchers often partner with Inuit communities to study Arctic ecosystems. Traditional hunters can tell you exactly how seal migration patterns have shifted over the decades. Try getting that kind of long-term data from a satellite. The Inuit have also adapted their hunting practices to ensure sustainability. They follow strict community guidelines about when and where to hunt, making sure seal populations stay healthy for future generations. Looking ahead, these hunting practices will keep evolving, but the core principles, respect for the land, sustainable harvesting, and community sharing, remain as solid as the Arctic ice. Well, maybe that's not the best comparison these days, but you get the point.